Join UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio on the second Saturday of every month for our live international radio marathon. Don't buy, don't comply, ask why.
Yes, hi, this is Detlev here, Wake News Radio, Wake News TV from Switzerland, broadcasting here our United We Strike radio marathon out of Switzerland. And we had already a few hours here, starting with the German part in our United We Strike radio marathon, and then having Neil Foster of Reality Bites Radio here, just before we start now getting into the next phase of our English transmission. Yes, and I'm welcoming everybody who's listening here, has tuned in, maybe still on from our earlier program. So, one of our major topic today, from my point of view, is the interesting story about the Bundy family, which is, making the top hits here in the internet, at least. Yeah, and it's basically a militarized siege of the Bundy Ranch, and this is not about the desert turtles as they keep telling to us, and it's also not about unpaid, well, maybe about unpaid fees the Bundy Ranch owes to the federal government, as they claim. But it's basically another story. Basically, it's also about freedom and humans living on the American soil, because they are basically victims of the Agenda 21 plan to depopulate all lands all over the world in order to pack everybody into big cities and take all possessions of those humans in order to make them completely dependent on the New World Order system. Yeah, and especially the Bundy-Farm case has tremendous coverage now in the so-called new or alternative media. The Matrix media is forced basically to report about it because there's so much information out there, so they have to respond. And what you read in there isn't wrong, really, in the Matrix media reports, but it is not telling the whole story as we usually experience ourselves. So I would like to take a bit of time in order to try to catch some of the main issues here and discuss this with you. And hopefully we will be getting some news during the course of our radio marathon today, because this weekend is being expected to be the weekend where lots of people are traveling to the Bundy-Farm area in Nevada, out of the whole country, out of the whole America. Even people are thinking about coming from Canada in order to support the fight for freedom there in Nevada, because it's more than just the desert turtles, which the Bureau of Land Management, a federal agency, which was created, long after the Bundy family started their cattling on the ranch. They started sometime around 1870, I think 71 it was, long before the current federalization took place. So they have a basic right to be there. It's also in the legal and lawful situation which has to be looked upon. I mean, they are living in Nevada, and Nevada, the federal government owns land in Nevada and other states, independent states. whether this is at all possible should be looked upon as well. Okay, now that's why I would like to cover this a little bit here by exploring what they are talking about, and lots of alternative or new media is reporting on this. Is some of the established new media, which is, for instance, Infowars.com. You can find some interesting information about the Constitution issues here in Nevada, and you find the headline, BLM action in Nevada is unconstitutional, here's why. And this is a report by Kurt Nimmo of Infowars.com. A direct violation of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. And it basically reads there, and if you're not familiar with the Bundy case, you will learn during the course of discussion here about this. Definitely. The establishment, I'm citing from this article, the establishment media is now paying attention to Cliven Bundy, who is the head of the Bundy family in this struggle with the Bureau of Land Management. And most of this coverage assumes Bundy is engaged in illegal cattle grazing on federal land. So that's the basic message out of the Matrix media. And I'm citing from CNN, which is here written in this report. The U.S. government is rounding up Bundy's cattle that it says have been grazing illegally on public lands in Clark County for more than 20 years, according to the Land Management Bureau and the National Park Service. And further, it's written, the BLM insists Mr. Bundy has failed to comply with multiple court orders to remove his cattle from the federal lands and to end the illegal trespass. Yeah, but it is the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, not Cliven Bundy, who is in violation of the law and the Constitution, specifically the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. And this clause, known as the Enclave Clause, authorizes Congress to purchase, own, and control land in the state under specific and limited conditions, namely for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, and not, as the Fed now insists, to protect an endangered tortoise. The founders were opposed to providing a centralized federal government with unlimited authority to purchase and, as is routinely the case today, seize state and private land. I'm citing of this report by Kurt Nimmo. During the Federal Convention debates in September 1787, Elbridge Gerry, who later went on to serve as vice president under James Madison, contended federal purchase of land might be made use of to enslave any particular state by buying up its territory, and that the strongholds proposed would be a means of awing the state into an undue obedience. That's basically what's taking place anyway, on many levels. In order to make certain the federal government did not abuse the Enclave Clause, the words consent of this legislator of state were added. Madison, Jefferson, and the founders were primarily interested in limited government and the diffusion of federal authority over the states for the protection of individual liberty. And in 1992, the Supreme Court issued an opinion on the framers' reasoning behind the state consent requirement. That was a case, New York versus the United States. And I'm citing further from this Infowars.com article, the Constitution does not protect the sovereignty of states for the benefit of the states or state governments as abstract political entities, or even for the benefit of the public officials governing the states. To the contrary, the Constitution divides authority between federal and state governments for the protection of individuals. State sovereignty is not just an end in itself, rather, federalism secures to citizens the liberties that derive from the diffusion of sovereign power. And President Madison knew unlimited federal power inevitably results in unbridled tyranny. By citing here, I venture to declare it as my opinion that were the power of Congress to be established in the latitude contended for, it would subvert the very foundations and transmute the very nature of the limited government established by the people of America, he wrote. And despite the desire of the founders and the originating principles of the nation, conceived as a constitutional republic, the federal government has repeatedly and habitually exacted dictatorial authority in Nevada and throughout much of the West. And the United States government owns and has broad authority to regulate federal lands in Nevada, the BLM arrogantly insists. And in response to challenges of federal ownership of the lands in Nevada, the Ninth Circuit held that the federal government owned all federal lands in Nevada and that those lands did not pass to the state upon statehood. But this is in direct conflict with Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. Clive Bundy's struggle, and I'm citing out of this article, struggle with the BLM in Nevada is exactly the situation Madison and the founders tried to prevent. The federal government does not have the constitutional authority to own land beyond what is stipulated in the Enclave Clause, and its seizure of land under the obviously fallacious pretense of protecting the territories is a serious violation of the Constitution. Madison made it perfectly clear in Federalist Paper 45, I'm citing here out of this article, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. The federal powers will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. And it reads further, it's really about our constitutional rights and statehood, Bundy has said. And whether this area known as the state of Nevada is owned by the United States government or is owned by the sovereign state of Nevada. Mr. Bundy, despite a propaganda campaign to the contrary launched by the federal government and its subservient media, is absolutely correct. The war shaping up between the Nevada rancher and the federal government is about states' rights and ultimately the rights of sovereign individuals. Yes, and you can find this here at Infowars.com. BLM action in Nevada is unconstitutional. Here's why. Yeah, and I think this is a basic thing to learn first before we go into the nitty-gritties, because it is basically here, talking about the Constitution and what the rights of the federal government really are in the sovereign states of America. And also shouldn't be the Constitution of the United States, but it should actually read the Constitution for the United States, right? Okay. Well, anyway, so this was very important to know, and we all followed the news. And if you look at the various videos that you can find, for instance, at YouTube, you can see that lots of people are gathering in the area, coming from out of different regions, even from California, even from Canada. It was told. Yeah, I mean, you see the high interest of everybody who is awakened to the situation, what will be happening, to Bundy and his family, because that is basically could hit everybody. It could mean this, fight being very important for everybody in the United States, and not even in the United States, but also all over the world, because you can identify similar activities in other nations as well. As I mentioned early on, you find this here in the Federal Republic of Germany, you find this in the UK, and even in other European countries and elsewhere. So, and I mentioned also the Philippines. As the land grabbing is taking place all over the world under the UN Agenda 21. Yeah, and we had further information coming in, which is so extraordinary that I think this needs to be heard also here in our Unite We Strike radio marathon and should be listened to by everybody. And it's not even the Tartars, which is making, the Bureau of Land Management so critically taking land away from Farmer Bundy and his cattle, confiscating his cattle. It's basically corporate interests which are enforced here by the BLM, because the newest information coming out says that Senator Harry Reid is behind the BLM land grab of the Bundy Ranch, also to be found here by Kit Daniels on Infowars.com. The Bureau of Land Management, whose director was Senator Harry Reid, the Democrats of Nevada, a former senior advisor, has purged documents from its website stating that the agency wants Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy's cattle off the land his family has worked for over 140 years in order to make way for solar panel power stations. Here we go. And you can find also some further information here with links and videos you can listen to. Deleted from the BLM.gov website, but reposted for posterity for the Free Republic. The BLM document entitled Cattle Trespass Impacts directly states that Bundy's cattle impacts solar development, more specifically the construction of utility-scale solar power generation facilities on public lands. Corporate interest. Non-governmental organizations have expressed concern that the regional mitigation strategy for the Dry Lake Solar Energy Zone utilizes Gold Butte as the location for off-site mitigation for impacts from solar development, and that those restoration activities are not durable with the presence of trespass cattle, the document states. And on this website, you can find a screenshot of this document. And it goes on further here in 2012. I'm citing here just taking a quick piece of water here. Water which is definitely needed in Nevada as well. It's pretty hot there. In 2012, the BLM and the U.S. Department of Energy published the final Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, or PEIS, for solar energy development in 6 southwestern states. The reports reads, the final solar Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement assessed the impact of utility-scale solar energy development on public lands in the 6 southwestern states of Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah. And I'm citing from there again the approved resource management plan amendments, record of decision, ROD, for solar energy development in 6 southwestern states implemented a comprehensive solar energy program for public lands in those states and incorporated land use allocations and programmatic and SEC-specific design features into land use plans in the 6-state study area. And back in 2012, the New American reported that Harry Reid's son, Rory Reid, was the chief representative for a Chinese energy firm planning to build a $5 billion solar plant on public land in Loughlin, Nevada. Here we go. Harry Reid's son. Wow. And journalist Marcus Stern with Reuters also reported that Senator Reid was heavily involved in the deal as well. Wow. So it's the Chinese and it's Harry Reid and Harry Reid's family who's heavily involved in this land grab. And I'm citing further here from this article, Reid and his oldest son, Rory, are both involved in an effort by the Chinese energy giant ENN Energy Group to build a $5 billion solar farm and a $5 billion solar plant and panel manufacturing plant in the southern Nevada desert, he wrote. Reid has been one of the project's most prominent advocates, helping recruit the company during a 2011 trip to China and applying his political muscle on behalf of the project in Nevada. So it's a long-term planned activity. And his son, a lawyer with a prominent Las Vegas firm that is representing ENN, the Chinese energy group, helped locate a 9,000-acre, which is 3,600 hectare desert site that is buying well below appraised value from Clark County, where Rory Reid formerly chaired the county commission. Here we go, another link. Oh dear. Although these reports are in plain view, the mainstream media has so far ignored this link. And the BLM official reason for encircling the Bundy family with sniper teams and helicopters was to protect the endangered desert tortoise, which the agency has previously been killing in mass due to budget constraints. So this is all a false flag operation. And further it goes here. Tortoise isn't the reason why BLM is harassing a 67-year-old rancher. They want his land. Journalist Dana Loesch wrote, the tortoise wasn't of concern when U.S. Senator Harry Reid worked with BLM to literally change the boundaries of the tortoise habitat to accommodate the development of his top donor, Harvey Whittemore. And Reid is accused of using the new BLM chief as a puppet to control Nevada land, already over 84% of which is owned by the federal government. Did you know? Well, and payback special interest, she added, BLM has proven that they have a situational concern for the desert turtles, as they have had no problem waiving their rules concerning wind or solar power development. Clearly, these developments have vastly affected a turtle's habitat more than a century-old quasi-homesteading grazing area. If only Clive and Bundy were a big raid donor. So it's all corporate interests, all corruption involved. Yeah, and updated by the Drudge report, there was an additional information. The #1 news aggregate site in the world has now picked up this story. Unfortunately for the BLM, the documents they wanted to delete are now exposed for the whole world to see. Update #2. ENN Energy Group describes itself as a privately owned clean energy distributor in China. A privately owned in communist China. Okay. However, as the People's Republic of China is a single-party state governed by the Communist Party, all large companies in China, one way or the other, are either controlled or are heavily influenced by the Chinese government. And who's running the Chinese government? Isn't it the family Li? One of the 12 or 13 bloodlines behind the dominant insane minority, which we'll keep talking about, those families and bloodlines who are ruling the whole world behind the curtains, obviously. Yeah, and you can see a few direct reports from the scene here by Infowars reporters. If you go on to the link to Infowars.com. Yes, and there were further informations which I want to share with you, because it's not only a matter of Nevada, as we were also learning early on here from this article. It's also an area which is tackled upon is between, or let's say a frontier area between Arizona and Texas, the Red River Rumble, as it says, and BLM wants to seize there 90,000 acres of Texas ranchers' land, and this was published here by MisguidedChildren.com, Domestic Affairs, with the title Red River Rumble. BLM wants to seize 90,000 acres of Texas ranchers' land. Yeah, and it says, I'm citing buyers, Texas along the Red River. The BLM stole 140 acres of the Tommy Henderson Ranch 30 years ago. They took his land and paid him absolutely nothing. He sued and lost. Now the BLM is using that court case as a precedent to do it again. The problem is the land they want to seize is property that ranchers have a deed for and have paid taxes on for over 100 years. And the BLM claims that about 90,000 acres, 116 miles along the Red River, have never belonged to Texas in the first place. They will seize the land and it will seriously change the boundaries between the two states, and you'll find respective videos there on this website. And since 1803, when the Louisiana Purchase was completed, there has been a controversy over the boundary between Oklahoma and Texas. The boundary is supposed to be the vegetation line on the south side of the Red River, but the river has moved over time. The problem is the definition of the boundary line. Oklahoma and Texas each use different semantics to define it, and the BLM is finding ways to use the disputed words to give them the ability to seize the land. According to the BLM, the Red River is always accretion, gradual accumulation of sediment to the south, and always avulsion rapid formation of a new river channel to the north. So according to the BLM, the boundary only moves one direction, never in the direction that favors the ranchers. Of course, they are looking to redraw the entire portion of the Red River boundary. That includes 90,000 acres of land along the 116-mile stretch for the river. Oh dear. And I'm citing from there, BLM officials believe they have a responsibility to manage land they believe is federal, which includes an estimated 90,000 acres along 160 miles of the Red River. If land is found to be public. BLM officials say they have three options: leave the land open, closed, or open with limitations. That was published in January 2014. Public input ignored. Yes, I should say so. So it is not only an issue here in Nevada with the Bundy family, but also in other areas. 90,000 acres by the BLM, and there should be also the constitutional concerns which we were talking about earlier. Okay. I think this is very important to learn that it is not only as it is being reported on the Matrix media. There's a lot more behind this, and we talked about the whole situation also in the beginning of the United We Strike radio marathon here in the German-speaking part, that this is taking place all over, because the nations, states, authorities, offices, bureaus, and so forth are no longer national and are no longer independent state managed, but it's all corporations which are taking over. In the Federal Republic of Germany, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, corporations do send their lobbyists to the government, which is not a national government anymore, and they are dictating, writing the laws, and then they put in their own personnel in order to execute what they have written, which is meeting their needs and their interests, and it is not in public interest. It's not in the interest of the people and on the humans which are living in the respective country. Yeah, and there's another report here by someone here published at beforeitsnews.com, militarized siege of Bundy ranches, all about oil fracking deals. There is another perspective to it. I mean, we've talked about the solar energy plans of the Chinese energy corporation together with Harry Reid, but it's also another issue to it. And I'm citing here by GMN, and we at GMN have been trying to uncover the real reason for the armed invasion of the Bundy Ranch, because our instincts had told us that it was never about a desert tortoise. Well, our instincts have paid off again, and that is what we found out. And I'm citing here of this article: the BLM military operation of rounding up Mr. Bundy's cattle is all about oil fracking leases that will make a lot of money for Dirty Harry Reid and his family. So he's involved in that part. Also. And and I just received a message here by Matt Navarro that he would like to join in the discussion of the Bundy farming issues here, because he was actually also expecting Sheriff Mack to join him later on in his part of the show, but Sheriff Mack is on site in Nevada, and maybe Matt has some more information here. So and then see. Let me just finish this here, Matt, and I'm pulling you in the discussion. So we at GMN, they had a feeling about what may be behind the whole militarized activity against the farmers' ranch, and it's seems to be all about oil fracking leases that will make a lot of money for Dirty Harry Reid and his family. And it's also a huge coincidence that the new head of the BLM is a man by the name of Neil Cornsey, who not only was the former senior policy advisor on public lands issues to Dirty Harry Reid. Oh dear. He has also worked on helping to craft a recent industry-friendly draft policy on fracking. Hi, here we go. Isn't it? Yes, and and you see lots of photos, obviously, and further links to other related published articles. And I'm continuing here. BLM fracking record exposed army siege and cattle theft from Bundy Ranch, really about fracking leases by Natural News. The Bureau of Land Management says its 200-man armed siege of the Clive and Bundy Ranch in Nevada is all about protecting an endangered tortoise. But a Natural News investigation has found out that BLM is actually in the business of raking in millions of dollars by leasing Nevada lands to energy companies that engage in fracking operations. And they found a document from the Nevada Bureau of Mines and Geology which shows significant exploratory drilling being conducted in precisely the same area where the Bundy family has been running cattle since the 1870s. And the Gold Butty area is indicated on the lower right corner of this document, which is linked there, and it clearly shows numerous exploratory drilling operations which have been conducted there. It always has a certain thing behind this. Well, this is it's revealing, isn't it? So it's clear that it's not being reported on in the mainstream media and the matrix media because they all are depending on each other. So and the propaganda has to be kept up as long as possible. Yeah, and it clearly shows what's going on really, and it's clear that I'm citing here again of this article at Before It's News, and of course oil has been found in nearby areas and possibly even within the Gold Butty area itself, and it is of course customary for the US government to bring armed soldiers to an oil dispute. That's the Operation Iraqi Freedom, for starters. Heavily armed snipers, helicopters, and militarized soldiers have been invoked over tortoises. Of course, that it was in Afghanistan. It was to liberate the women there, wasn't it? Sort of. Okay. Anyone who thinks this siege is about reptiles, well, done by reptiles, but not about reptiles, is kidding themselves. Here's the map showing the oil exploration conducted on the land where Bundy runs his cattle, and all those red crosshairs are oil and gas exploration drilling operations. There's a huge map, which you can have a look at if you go to the link beforeitsnews.com, alternative, April 2014, militarized siege of Bundy Ranch is all about oil fracking leases. Yes, and well, that's an interesting insight, isn't it? Did you read about this at CNN or New York Times or what have you? Most probably not. Yes, but on the other hand, it's also for the people living there, and not only for the Bundy family, it's for everybody. It's about freedom, and it's about your human rights. Especially the constitutional issues in America, obviously. And that's why lots of people, are focusing on this, and freedom issues have been discussed in the community of freedom seekers and the truth movement, if you want to, for a long time. And lots of rumors have gone ahead this, and everybody's basically expecting a second revolution in the United States to start. And I just learned here that Matt is available, and I'll try to get him in here for the further discussion on the issue. So stay here for a second while I'm trying to pull Matt into this discussion. So stay tuned, and I'll try to get him in here. Okay. Yes. So it's getting very exciting, especially for everybody else who's looking on the United States as this nation or this country which allows its population still to be armed, right? But they are in the process of taking all the weapons away. So I don't know whether Matt is already in
I'm
here.
Can
You're
you hear
here.
me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Fine.
Morning.
So, first of all,
Morning, Detlev.
good morning, Matt. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. How are you, Detlev?
I'm fine. Well, I'm already, working here on the production side and in our United We Strike Radio marathon, but you just woke up, sort of. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just woke up and I was checking my email and got a message from Sheriff Mack that said he was leaving this morning to go to what is that?
To Nevada.
Nevada, the Bundy Ranch,
Yeah.
Bunkerville. Yeah, they call it Bunkerville.
Yeah.
So I called him and he was on the road just outside of Phoenix. He's got a long drive ahead of him. So I don't know if we will be able to get him on at 10 a.m. Pacific time like we were scheduled. We'll try. And if we get him, we're able to get him on, we'll get him on for a quick update. But he's on his way to the Bundy Ranch to help, see what he can do to stabilize the situation and avoid bloodshed there. Because, as you've been describing, the federal government's encroachment on land use and removing private land rights from the American citizen is a pervasive problem. And we all know this is all Agenda 21 related. The idea of Agenda 21 is to put us into these controlled smart cities where every bit of your life is tracked and monitored. And so hopefully we can get Sheriff Mack on for a little while later. But, if he's not available, I was going to ask you, Detlev, if you wanted to join me on my segment at 10 a.m. Pacific time so we can continue this discussion.
Yeah, we'll see whether this is possible. And on the other hand, we will be receiving information during the whole weekend. So it's going to be very interesting to follow up anyways. Isn't it, Matt?
Yes, it will be. As things develop there, it could get dicey. Now, I don't know if you were around for when Ruby Ridge occurred. This, to me, seems like another Ruby Ridge type of incident. They killed the sniper, Lon Horiuchi, just killed Vicky Weaver and the baby. I think they spared the baby, but killed Vicky Weaver while she was holding the baby with snipers. And to hear that they have snipers out there and 200 BLM agents running around in the desert makes me a little nervous, because these guys are trigger happy, militarized, and these are Bureau of Land Management folks. These are folks that are there to oversee the interests of the American public on America's land. Now here they are coming in and enforcing their will via gunpoint on American citizens. It's very concerning.
Yes, and if you follow the news, and I'm dedicating on my website also a space here for the revolution in USA. That's how it's called by on awakenings.net. Because we got some information that American militia is coming into the game here and is sending people there. I've even read something about 5,000 are mobilizing to come to Bundy's ranch. Also, Bundy himself is not very happy about any of those armed conflicts, and he's basically saying, well, please come, but don't come here in camouflage and heavily armed, and just accompany us in putting out this information to the public and protest as peacefully as possible. So,
well, with these militias, I think they're a good idea, but in the end, I don't think they'll work because they're always infiltrated by these government agent provocateurs, and there's no way to keep them out, or it's difficult to keep them out before they start creating havoc, and that's what I'm afraid of here. You'll get a provocateur from one of these militias, government agent types, and they'll just start something, and then gives the government the excuse to start shooting. I mean, they're already hurting people, tasing people, just trying to escalate the violence. And what I don't understand, these BLM people are American citizens. They're doing this to their own countrymen. I don't understand that. I don't understand why they would be so violent to a fellow American. This is not the kind of country we used to live in. It's I guess it's this federalization, globalistic mentality of all of our law enforcement, this militarization of our law enforcement that gives these guys, this idea of little Rambos. And that's really what just little kids thinking they're Rambo and can take their fantasies out on American people. And it just bothers me that way. This is not America. This is not what America stands for, what America used to stand for. And I'm glad to see all these people out there supporting the Bundy Ranch, because that's what we need. We need to put a stop to it at some point, and maybe this is it, and maybe this is that key turning point in American history where we turn this new world order around. But that these militarized little kids running around in BLM suits can get their jollies off on intimidating their fellow Americans, that's just troublesome.
Yeah, and they even stocked up. I mean, they called in 100 additional so-called agents, like sort of hired guns from other states, so out of Nevada, from other American states. So, and people have been talking to one of those agents who came from, I don't know, Oregon or someplace, and were asking him why he's there, and then he couldn't really give any information. I mean, he said, I don't know what really the purpose is. I'm here to do my job. And they were confronting him, a lady saying, well, you're taking away the livelihood of an old man, of an old farmer. Do you understand that? And he said, well, I have no idea. No, I don't really want to do this, but I have to because it's my job. So we have got this Nuremberg, syndrome, sort of.
Yeah. Maybe, that's how the Nazis were able to get away with what they did. Just people are complacent enough that they just go along to get along without questioning. And that's why here at United We Strike, we say, don't buy, don't comply, ask why. Ask why, why are they doing this? But, it's been a long time since we've had vaccinations and fluoridated water that these politicians and these government agents, they're as stupid as the American public they're dumbed down as much as the American public, so they're just doing what they're told, like little robots and zombies.
Yes, and furthermore, they are obviously getting very good salaries, or they're getting increases, if they participate in those activities and premiums and what have you. So they are there for the money.
Yeah.
So they're sort of
mercenary,
mercenary troop. You can question this as well. I mean, the U.S. military is withdrawn, and it's planned to be withdrawn from the Near East or Middle East areas, but they are being replaced by mercenaries. So that it's not a withdrawal of power; it's just an exchange.
Right, and who pays for it? The American public.
Right. And that's where it has to stop. And I always appreciate Karen's move to initiate this, the first, project she had, the tax boycott,
Tax-free.
if you like to, the tax-free thing.
Tax-free 15.
On the 15th, yes. And
what was that, 5 years ago?
Yes, or even more, maybe 6 years ago. She started this, and this was the initial start also for the United We Strike thing, and I think that's the way to do it. So we have to dry out these tyrants, right?
Well, starve them of the fuel that
starve the beast.
Yeah, starve them of the fuel that feeds them, and that's our money. But they can print more, so I don't think that'll work.
Yeah,
I mean they can print more or just go to a different form of currency, and they still own the world. I think what we need to do is one, educate ourselves on how to stay healthy, because the main goal of the New World Order is to exterminate 80 to 90% of the world's population, and then move us off of our ranches, our farms, our homes, and put us into these little cubby holes called smart cities, and just have the rest of the world available to the elite, while 500 million or so of us are there to support their needs, essentially.
That's absolutely right, and it's the corporatism which is taking over, and we also found out early on, I cited here from the different articles, that basically it's not the tortoise or the original functions of the BLM which are here in the focus, but it's in the corporate interests of people like Harry Reid with their greed, and a corporation, a Chinese corporation, which is interested in the land of the Americans. Can you imagine?
I can. They want those Chinese, those international free trade zones that the Chinese can operate as if it were an independent nation within America, just kind of like Washington, D.C. or the City of London or the Vatican. I can believe that, but it's not right. And the situation in Nevada is maybe that one spark that'll make the American people wake up and start to take notice. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I'm listening to many voices so far. I'm getting the impression that people are waking to the fact that there's treason going on. I mean, if you hand over American land to a Chinese corporation by force, by forcing your own population out of the area, taking away the land, which is also unconstitutional, as we learned earlier, then this is high treason, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But they've been doing it. As you point out, they've been doing this for quite some time on their Agenda 21, and taking the land and using it for corporate purposes. I'm going to have to jump here, Detlev, so I can get ready for my segment.
Okay.
I'd like you to. Okay, I'd like you to stick around though, and if at all possible, I'd like you to join me, and maybe you can help. If you've got a couple questions for Sheriff Mack, if we can get a hold of him, you can join us then.
Sure.
But I'd like to have you come on my segment, and then we can further discuss this, because it's very poignant at this point in time. This is the kind of thing that UnitedWeStrike.com focuses on, because this identifies what the New World Order is, and we're watching it play out in the news for us.
Oh, absolutely. So thanks a lot. And we're going into a break anyways now. So we'll be listening to a patriot as well. Not exactly from the U.S., but it's still standing by an artist here from Africa. And and we will be right back after this. So stay tuned. We are on the United We Strike Radio Marathon, April 12th, 2014. This is Detlev News Radio here, reporting from Switzerland. So stay tuned.
You're listening to UnitedWeStrike.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. Ask why. UnitedWeStrike.com radio.